When you buy a book on Amazon.com, there are often many seller options available, each with a different price. You can imagine that business owners spend a lot of time changing their price to try and find the right outcomes for their business. Many such sellers have handed over the pricing decisions to algorithms. A few years ago, 2 booksellers were trying to sell copies of a textbook about flies, both using algorithmic pricing that would check back regularly and update the price. One vendor's strategy was to have the lowest price on the market by a small margin in order to continually undercut the price of its competitors. A second vendor's strategy was to find the lowest competitive price and then mark up his copy to be slightly more expensive. Both ideas independently sound reasonable, yet for this one book, where both of these sellers and only these sellers were competing, the 2 strategies ran furiously out of control. While this situation may have frustrated a few Diptera enthusiasts on a budget, overall, no real harm was done. But it does demonstrate the harm that blind automation can potentially cause. As intelligent systems play larger roles in our lives, and some predictive models make better decisions than humans can, a growing discussion is emerging on how we take advantage of predictive models while keeping a human in the loop.
Is your algorithm going to replace my judgment? It's this fear of an algorithm making a decision for me, and I don't want a mathematical model telling me who's going to be right for my team. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable concern to have, and it's why we really work with our partners to be just that, to be partners. So our algorithm should be a partner to the hiring manager. It should be something that helps identify risk and helps surface candidates that maybe the hiring manager might have discounted, but who in reality could be very successful in their department and in the role that they're trying to fill. So when we first onboard a client, we may be optimizing for multiple outcomes. So typically we're starting with retention. So we're really focused on predicting the likelihood that an applicant will be retained in the given role that they're applying to. So in that case, we want the client, we want the recruiters of the client and the hiring managers of the client to think about the score as a ranking, essentially, of how likely is this individual to be retained in the role to which they've applied. So the higher the better. Someone that scores 95% is much more likely to be retained in the role than someone that scores 5%.
In this way, an algorithmic evaluation is identical to an expert opinion. We seek out guidance from sources we know to be reliable, and we make our own decisions for how exactly we integrate their expertise into our hiring decisions. Let's hear about that process from someone with first-hand experience using Arena's predictions as part of their evaluation process.
Data is really important, and if you can streamline the number of humans that you would consider for a job, then the HR people can do their job better. No, we should never take the interview out of the process because that face-to-face really tells you how people are. You can't get the nonverbals, from predictive analytics, but if the predictive analytics can give you an idea of whether this person is going to be successful in the job, I don't see any reason why any human resources organization would question that.
I always tell our clients, I'm a mathematician and statistician by training, and I would be the first to say that I don't believe an algorithm should make a hiring decision. So algorithms can give us information that we as human beings can't possibly assimilate ourselves, but they don't capture all of the information about an individual. And hiring is a very personal experience. And so the way we recommend using Arena is looking at, using this as a data point and looking at those candidates that score above some threshold, but then using your judgment, your experience, what you know as a hiring manager about your team, about in a clinical position, about the kinds of patients that you deal with, and making that final decision based on your expertise and your knowledge as a leader. And so Arena is really designed to be a partner to that judgment that hiring managers have.
Think about when you interview someone, you get a lot of signals. Some of it is just the way the candidate is dressed, whether they show up on time, whether or not the words that are coming out of their mouths, how they answer the question, whether they answer questions, whether their questions are seen as right or wrong. Not all of those are relevant to making the hiring decision, but you do walk out of there and, right or wrong, you come out with an impression of that candidate. And it's a lot more than just the information that you would get had that candidate submitted to you a piece of paper.
One of the things that our partners, when they look at using the score, one of the concerns that hiring managers often have is, they have a candidate that they think is stellar, and it could be someone that was referred by a fellow employee. It could be someone they've worked with in a previous job, and they go through our process and they don't score very well. Maybe they score 30%, and so they're sort of saying, how can that be? I know this person, I've worked with them before, or they came recommended, and what we say to folks is. The score is, think of it as sort of a measure of risk. So if you have someone that you think is a stellar candidate and they score 35%, what that's telling you is that there's some pretty good risk there that person is not going to be retained in the role. It doesn't mean they're not good at their job. It doesn't mean they're not a great ER nurse. But it might be indicating that maybe this particular facility or this department is one in which they're not going to be as successful, or maybe they're not going to be as happy there. And so we don't say to our partners, you shouldn't hire someone, you should never hire anyone below a certain score. What we say to them is use this as an indicator of risk. So if you've got someone that you really think is a great candidate and they don't score well, then maybe when you bring them in for an interview, you really spend a little extra time and really do some extra vetting, because the data is indicating that there's a lot of risk there that this individual is not going to be retained.
You're expected now to be data-driven.
Exactly.
And so for some people, that's difficult. Because you ask somebody, why are you in human resources? And they say, because I'm a people person. Well, yeah, but you also need to be an analyst. And, being an analyst means you need to be comfortable with data. And so that's an adjustment. But that's the evolution of HR. It's got to be data-driven. Because business is data-driven, right? You look at your profits and your losses, So, and that's why it's easier to explain an instrument like Arena when you talk about it in terms of cost benefit. And you could spend 10 widgets here that prevents you from having to spend 20 widgets over here. That makes sense.
People hear a lot about big data, data science. For individuals who don't work in the field or in related fields, it may be a little scary. They think about privacy concerns and what kind of data are you gathering about someone, and is it appropriate? That's something that we take very seriously. So anytime that we're looking at new data sources and we're looking at data sets that might allow us to predict with greater and greater accuracy, we're also asking ourselves the ethical questions about not just is it legal for us to gather this data. I mean, that's sort of a threshold question. We're not going to gather any data that it's not legal for us to gather. But more importantly, do we think it's moral for us to gather that data? Do we think that an individual, an applicant, would be okay with us using this type of data to help find a good match for them in a job?
But there's also information that would be available, but that we will not use because it's discriminatory, obviously. So whenever we think about using new features, that is something we always discuss a lot, because features can be either directly or indirectly discriminatory.
This is a growing concern amongst responsible data scientists. Does the possibility exist that a model inadvertently learn about a pattern in data and develop an unintended bias? For example, whether an applicant owns or rents their home should not affect hiring. It's very common practice for data scientists to remove such features from their work so that it's impossible for an algorithm to find a pattern like that. But for the Arena team, that wasn't quite good enough. They wanted to explore whether personal or protected information like age or gender had even a remote possibility of influencing their model in some unforeseen way.
We don't really get that kind of data from our clients because it's sensitive information. And so what I ended up having to do was to come up with another piece of software that would impute gender based on the name of the first name of the applicant, which is data that is sensitive information that we do have in our database. And then we looked at the proportion of men and women who were recommended by our models, and our confidence intervals told us that there wasn't any kind of bias in either the client hiring practices or the models, but these are very preliminary types of results.
Dedicated vigilance to creating bias-free models means there's human oversight. But in a world on the verge of self-driving cars, we face many questions about where the boundary exists between decisions a human should make and decisions made through automation.
No predictive model is going to get it right all the time. There's going to be someone that scored 98% and they're going to leave in 30 days. And there's going to be someone that scores 20% and you end up hiring them and they're a very successful long-term employee. What we know, what the data shows us, across over 400 organizations where we're operating, is that the models get it right more often than not. So, and that's really what we want to compare ourselves against. So, do we help the leaders on the ground, the hiring managers, the recruiters, do we help those folks make better decisions so that their accuracy, if you will, is increasing? And that happens across the board with all of our partners.
In the 20th century, human beings began mastering industrial automation. In the 21st century, our appetite for automation through data-driven algorithms stands to continue revolutionizing the world. The algorithms at our disposal today can process more data in seconds than we could likely process manually in a year. This opens great opportunities for the use of predictive models, as well as an important responsibility in how we leverage those models. Tools like Arena's predictions don't replace the entire hiring process. Their predictions provide evidence-based guidance. You wouldn't buy a house without getting an inspection. The cost of that expert inspector's report is usually small compared to the risk involved in a poor decision. If you're ready to see how Arena can help you improve the effectiveness of your healthcare hiring process, please visit arena.io to request a demo.